welcome to Bite Size Bios. This is meant to be a mini-sode that will accompany HDTH. Every week, I will pick a person from history and dive into their lives. All right, and welcome back to another episode of Bite Size Bios. I am your host, Richard Dix. This is episode number 36 coming at you today. We are going to talk about Benito Mussolini, who of course was the leader of Italy in World War II. We're going to learn a lot about this guy, but before we get to him, as is customary with the way this episode format works, this is the mini-sode accompaniment to HDTH, so of course we have to go back. We have to go back and talk about last week's episode of how did that happen. We found out how the Korean War happened. And if you listened, we summed it up almost in the first 5 minutes, but for, the sake of the art of the podcast, we just kept breaking down different things about the war itself. But the true, reality of how the Korean War happened is just we had a down and out, disenfranchised Korea that was left gutted basically by Japan once Japan was left gutted by America, is really how the Korean War happened. Japan had been occupying Korea for upwards of 40 years, took out their entire government, took out their entire culture, and was running them up until they got blown to smithereens by the only atomic bombs ever dropped on people in human history. Once they did that, Korea didn't know what to do. They didn't know where to go. They were split, literally and figuratively. And of course, they were gobbled up by the two main factions that were controlling the world at the time, of course, is the Soviets and America. This is, of course, yet another, it was not the first. This is probably the first proxy war that will be fought during the Cold War. I don't know if that's 100% true, but I feel like it is if you think about the time frame. The Korean War happens in the early 50s, and World War II ends in 1945. I do believe, and then we're gonna cover that when we cover the Cold War in its entirety, which is coming down the pike, of course, but we haven't gotten there. But there were a number of proxy wars. We've already covered one or two. I believe we covered the Bay of Pigs and the Cuban Missile Crisis. That in itself was a proxy war, but the Korean War is what I would consider to be the first one where it's like the Russians take one side and we take the other side, and we're all like, have them fight on our behalf instead of us actually fighting, which to me has always just seemed like some. I mean, I guess I'm happy. I don't want Americans. I don't want anybody to die. You know what I mean? But I guess you definitely don't want your people from your home country to die. Does that seem right or wrong or mean? I'm not sure. But it'd be interesting if that actually finally happened, especially now, especially after we've had 80 years of a Cold War and we dismantled an entire communist regime in the midst and also broke down a wall, if we actually finally went at it. But yeah, that was the Korean War. The only question I had, the only thing that I wanted to run back or think about was the aftermath, right? And then were there any good Korean War movies? So we're going to start with the latter, and I'm going to Google it while we're talking about, are there any, because I can't think of any good Korean War movies. Hit me, Google. What do we got? It makes complete sense. I've never seen any of these movies. Like, they don't make good movies about the Korean War. Let's see. 10 best Korean War movies is a link that I'm currently clicking. I mean, don't get me wrong. I want to watch some of these. I'm just saying, like, they're not touted the way Saving Private Ryan or Hamburger Hill or Apocalypse Now or Jarhead or any of that stuff. You know what I mean? They're not, I've never heard of any of these. Wait, so I'm seeing something that says that MASH was inspired by, or this was with the Korean War, but I thought MASH was the Vietnam War. Let's see here. I'm new to all this MASH stuff. I never really watched it. Wasn't really a fan. Get Out. Okay, so it was. Learn. I might have to go back and watch MASH now. I never knew that. I always thought it was the Vietnam War. Interesting. It would make sense. It makes a lot of sense when you think about it from the perspective of someone who never lived it. because I was looking at the time frames, and it's like, yeah, they wouldn't make a show about the Vietnam War while the Vietnam War is still happening or just happened. Okay, guys, we're all learning. That's what this is about. We're all learning today. Some of you older folks are probably listening to this are like, yeah, dummy, yeah, I knew. Well, I didn't know, buddy. I skipped that and went to the Cosby Show. Look how that worked out for all of us. But yeah, so MASH, great. That's great. We all just, anything else? That's the only one that I see here. What is this? No. Okay, so MASH. Go check out MASH. I'm probably going to do it. We'll all meet up later and talk about our favorite parts of the episode. And now we're going to get to Korean War Aftermath. Now, the main thing that I thought I didn't quite cover too much in the end of the last episode was just kind of how, like the armistice itself and how we are still basically, I don't know, kind of at war, but not really at war. Yeah, so I mean, we're still kind of at war with North Korea, which is why, really, that America still has troops in South Korea, is because we signed a, what do they call it? It was an armistice, and we signed a mutual defense treaty, as they say, which underpins the alliance between the two countries, meaning we won't really pop off at each other. But under the treaty, the U.S. committed to aid South Korea in the event of an attack, and in so doing has maintained a continuous presence of land, air, and sea forces on the peninsula capable of responding to North Korean aggression. Which basically means we are kind of always chilling, just ready to go. So that's something I wanted to nail home as far as, for the Korea episode, is that we're still at war with them. We're just not really actively at war with them is the best way to put it. And there's no good Korean movies, but MASH is a TV show, so check that out. I don't know if there's much else to say before we get down to the nitty gritty of who Benito Mussolini is. I don't even remember if I'm still doing it. What am I watching every week for this? I don't know, but I'll tell you what I watched last night, just for S&Gs. I watched this movie called The Storm of the Century. It's on YouTube, and it's written by Stephen King, which of course, if you know him, he doesn't miss. The guy is, his brain should be studied for science when he dies, because the fact that he can just churn out just hit after hit after it's remarkable. I mean, they're not all, going to the Smithsonian. They're not all amazing things, but they're all pretty well put together, which is still, if you've ever tried to write a story, it's not the easiest thing. But so, yeah, The Storm of the Century, written by him. I want to say it's about 20 years old, maybe, give or take. Like I said, it's on YouTube for free. So whatever that says to you. There's a storm coming in. There's a guy that comes into the town, and he just starts killing some people, starts caning folks in the face, like bow, bow, in the face with a cane. As the storm's setting in, but when people try to roll up on him and be like, "Yo, bro, stop doing that," we're trying to get out of the storm. He starts spouting off like stuff that he knows about the people that come and talk to him, who are trying to stop him, which freaks them out and they run away. So he kind of he doesn't keep caning, but he just chills, for a while. And honestly, I fell asleep about halfway through, so I don't really know how it ends. But that's what I've been watching. Let's see. Is there anything else to say? I don't really think so. I hope you guys are really enjoying the 40s to 70s. I am. I must say, I've having a theme for this has been really helpful for these last few weeks. It just opens things up. We talk about. I feel like I've always considered this to be a part of the time in the 20th century that I know pretty well. But I've found that that's not 100% the case now that I've dived so deep into it. But yeah, so of course HTT Happen for all the socials, htthappen.com for anything over on that website. I've been trying to get it back going. We got all the transcripts up there now that have not been up there for the past few weeks. But yeah, go check that out. Give us 5 stars wherever you listen to this. It really helps the pod grow. 2 stars if you didn't love it. Tell us why you didn't love it, because constructive criticism is always welcome. We definitely appreciate it. Let's see, without anything else to say, I guess, yeah, without further ado, as we know to do, here is the episode.
I am very glad to be able to express my friendly feelings towards the American nation. Friendship with which Italy looks at the millions of citizens who from Alaska to Florida, from the Pacific to the Atlantic, live in the United States, is today deeply rooted in our hearts.
Okay, so we are here today to talk about Mussolini. Mussolini. Kind of sounds like a pasta, I've always thought. Benito, to be exact. Benito Mussolini. He was born on July 29th, 1883, in a place called Dovia de in a place called Dovia, right? It's a small town in the province of Forli in Romania, but Romagna, it's like lasagna, but with Rome in the front. All right, so he was born there, like I said, July 29th, 1883. Later, during the fascist era, Prodapio, that's the word I couldn't get earlier, he was dubbed Deuce's Town. I think it was Deuce is a nickname for Mussolini. So Benito Mussolini's father, his name was Alessandro Mussolini. He was a blacksmith and a socialist. While his mother, her name was Rosa. She was a devout Catholic school teacher. Given his father's political leanings, Mussolini was named Benito after liberal Mexican president Benito Juarez. Little known fact there. His middle names, Andrea and Amilcare, were for Italian socialists Andrea Costa and Amilcare Cipriani. How am I doing now with these words, this pronunciation? So that's cool. I never knew that. So he himself was named after a politician, and he would go into politics, if you can call being a dictator politics. So in return for the dad being able to name his kids whatever he wanted to, basically, his mom dictated that he'd be baptized at birth. So they had a little trade-off. Benito was the eldest of his parents' 3 children. His other his other siblings were Arnaldo and Edvige, which I'm guessing is more like Edvige, you know? It's spelled Edvige, which is this American mouth just gives Edvige, you know? As a young boy, Mussolini would spend time helping his father in the smithy. That's what it says here. I guess that's a nickname for blacksmith. That's pretty cool. Like, where are you going? I'm on the way to the smithy. Actually, it's not that cool. But Mussolini's early political views were strongly influenced by his father, who we mentioned was a socialist, who he idolized the 19th century Italian nationalist figures with humanist tendencies such as Carlo Pisacane, Giuseppe Mazzini, Giuseppe Garibaldi, all the Giuseppes, basically. His father's political outlook combined with views of anarchist figures such as Carlo Caffiero and Mikhail Bakunin, the military authoritarianism of Garibaldi, and the nationalism of Mazzini. I'm not really sure why I just read that, so I thought that was going to lead to something. It did not. I'm going to skip on past that. So Mussolini, he was sent to a boarding school in Faenza. It was run by monks. He went to a boarding school run by monks. Despite being shy, he often clashed with teachers and fellow boarders due to his proud, grumpy, and violent behavior. He injured a classmate with a penknife during an argument at one point. He would actually end up leaving that school. Let's see. This is all happening, just to give you dates, right around the turn of the century. Right around 1900 is when old Mussolini is in school. So he leaves the monk school. He goes to a non-religious school, which he was doing better. I guess the monks were messing with him. I don't know. You know, maybe monks aren't for everybody. But he does better. So he pretty much finishes school there. He moves to Switzerland. This is in 1902. Partly to avoid military service, which is ironic, given, you know, what he would come to do later on. Let's see if we can kind of skip down. So we got through his childhood here. We're going to get to it. Of course, if we haven't mentioned, I'm sure I might have been said before, if you don't know Benito Mussolini, which I mean, some people don't, but you should, he used to run Italy, and he, during World War II, and his choices during World War II were questionable at best, but also had, you know, I would imagine, a profound outcome on the ending of the war, because they're the only ones, I think, in World War II that switched sides. You know, they started this war on Hitler's side, and then like halfway through, they were like, oh no, we hate Nazis. Like, oh, okay, buddy, you know. So but we're jumping 40 years ahead. Like I said, we're 1902. This guy just got to Switzerland because he's dodging military service, which, as we said, is odd because he would end up kind of running the Italian military, which might explain why he changed sides during the war. All right, so where are we at here? Let's see. He was arrested in Geneva and expelled for falsifying his papers. He 1904, he was back in the University of Lausanne, Department of Social Science. Let's see. He was attending. So this is what I got here. Let me jump forward. I don't know. I'm interested in Mussolini for those specific facts. For the fact that he chose to switch sides during the war, and the fact that I don't know. He used you never think of. It took me a long time to think of Italy as a a dictatorship, and let's pull it up just to make sure. I don't want to mince words and use the wrong words here. Let's see. Benito, because I want him to. He's classified as a dictator because I don't know. Not everybody is what you think they are. Let's see. He was prime minister. Okay, yeah. So I'm glad we looked it up. So just for the words, for the verbiage, he's a prime minister. But I feel like this dude's got some real dictator vibes, if you get my drift. And since we're talking about dictators and the difference, I looked up because I was wondering, what is the difference? Because he led a fascist government, but not all dictators are fascist is a good way to put it. Because you think they're one and the same. So I have a little list here that kind of explains the difference. I mean, fascism, of course, it is it's a far right authoritarian political regime or movement characterized by extreme nationalism, militarism, centralized autocracy, and a dictatorial. Is that how you say that? Dictatorial. Okay. But yeah, so that's the one of the main differences between that and dictatorships is usually the nationalism, which I never really thought about. So that they said not all dictatorships are classified by extreme nationalism or even militarism. I think so it's just dictatorship is like when a guy runs the entire country and gives nobody any say. That's just a dictatorship across the board. But like fascism is where they kind of run the entire government, and I guess like I said, they don't really give anybody a say, but they don't always have to be all about the military or all about the nationalism. That you could talk about that forever, but I feel like that's important to mention the fascist element because that is a large part of who Mussolini was and what would end up leading to his demise. And I was wondering when I got into this, what made people dislike him so much? Because I didn't know that much about him before I did this. And I watched a documentary and read a couple articles, and I figured it out. I think I've got the answer. He was just as bad, if not worse than Hitler. He's basically baby Hitler, in the sense of atrocity levels. But actually they would have kind of a interesting, I don't know what kind of relationship you would call it, where they were like brothers in a sense, of older brother, little brother, because basically how it works is Mussolini kind of took over Italy first before Hitler took over Germany. Hitler was able to look back and see what Hitler or what Mussolini did to kind of overtake what is considered an old colonial power, and it kind of gave him the cachet to kind of do the same thing in Germany. So he saw what was happening and implemented his own version in Germany, which means in the beginning Mussolini was kind of like the big brother, but then as Hitler just metastasizes the regime, the Third Reich just grows, in a ridiculous fashion. He becomes the big brother at that point. But and to put it in perspective, I didn't realize, and I guess we're gonna say something that I don't know if it's not the timeline the way people think of it. But I think you're hearing it here that the World War II actually started in 1935. That's what I'm gonna put that right there for you guys. And that's because that's when Mussolini invaded Ethiopia. And it's important because he basically went in there, just killed a bunch of people, hundreds of thousands of people, and basically broke all the UN laws that had been in place to stop stuff like that, so that wouldn't happen. And when the leader of Ethiopia went to the UN and was like, "Hey, can y'all get somebody in here to get this guy to stop killing my people?" They were like, "Huh? What'd you say? We don't speak Ethiopian. Sorry, bud." And they just let it happen. And so that gave Hitler once again like the green light to be like, oh, so we can just start taking over countries, like, you know, nobody really cares. So, and I mean, that would be 4 years later, and then there's arguments to say that World War II started when Japan invaded China in 37, but I do think that this really is the precursor, if not like the first stone to be cast in World War II, is Mussolini going down there and just messing up some Ethiopian people. He did the same thing in Libya before that. I'm not sure if that could be considered the beginning. I don't think so, but that's what makes people not like him. If you want, I was wondering. I was, you know, I said the same thing about Stalin the last time we did it, and I mean, obviously he killed some people. People are dead, but I think the difference in Stalin to Mussolini, and that's just, I don't know, I could be wrong. I could totally be wrong. But it seems that Stalin did things to his people, which were, you know, not great. He basically starved his people to death and all that good stuff. But he wasn't out here, to the best of my knowledge, and I haven't done the research, so if I'm wrong, I guess at me, I guess. But he didn't do it in like other, you know, he wasn't going to Africa, you know, and doing all that, which is just, you know, beyond extra. So that's a little bit of a twofer right there. That's more about his life in the 30s. And then also now we know why he's such a bad guy. But he basically does the same thing as Hitler does when he comes to power, you know, in Italy. That's why I called him Baby Hitler, because, you know, Hitler is considered to be like the boss, you know, the Bowser of like all the bad dictators. But like, really, like, Mussolini was like, you know, he was Hitler before Hitler was Hitler, if you get my drift. So the last thing to really talk about, I guess, is his death, which was gruesome. Like one of the worst, like really, and I don't know, once again, the comparisons, you would think that Hitler would die in the way that Mussolini did, but he didn't. As we know, we haven't covered him on a BSB, but, you know, we know he committed suicide in his bunker as the Russian forces were coming down on him in Berlin, right? But Mussolini would die. I mean, he got shot, I think, but actually, like, the way it ended, like, his body just got disparaged. Let's see if I have any notes about that. Let's see how the death of Mussolini. I mean, they have the pictures. I'm looking at the pictures right now, and I can't lie. It just feels like something nobody should see, or I don't know. It's hard to believe that, you know, humanity exists in such a way. But yeah, I mean, they would spit on his corpse. Even the chick he was with, you know, which, I mean, her main crime was just, you know, being with a dude who was probably not so great, you know. But she gets hung up by her heels too and gets killed. And in this, they said he was a very promiscuous man. They said he had been with hundreds of women. And that it was usually violent and mean. They said that in the documentary, and then right after that they were like, oh, and then there was no what is that? There's like, nobody ever thought that this guy would turn into like the mean dictator or whatever. I'm like, really? That doesn't those actions don't give you a little bit of foreshadowing? I don't know, but yeah, I think that's Mussolini. I think that's we're gonna keep it still bite size. He was important to World War II. And did a lot of the same bad things that Hitler did. Is the one thing I think that we should really take away from this. Is I didn't really know when I came in here. I knew that people didn't like him. I knew that he was kind of a dictator, but I didn't realize he had killed millions of people too. He also, one last thing before we get out of here, used mustard gas on the Ethiopians. That's how one of the ways he kind of took over the entire country. And that's something that even Hitler wouldn't do. So I mean, literally, when Hitler's like, "Hey, don't do anything I wouldn't do," and then you do it, bro, like, whoa. All right, and that was Mussolini, a bite-sized bio, number 36 on Benito Mussolini. Hope you guys liked it. I learned a lot about Benito, old Benny, you know, because we're on a first-name basis now after, you know, all the stuff that I've learned about him. Learned, like we said, that he is just as bad as Hitler. He's just as bad as everyone said he was. And you wonder, I mean, just thinking out loud for the sake of the podcast, I mean, is a death like that deserve it? Is it any more, I don't know, not justified, may not be the word, but like, do you get something out of it? Do you get something out of hanging somebody upside down, and, you know, just defiling their body? Yeah, and I'm asking, I'm not judging, I'm truly asking, because I mean, maybe you do. I've never done that to anybody. I've never done anything like that. And you wonder, what would we as a world, because and we talked about with the body of Hitler and how that even in itself became one of the very fetuses, the very beginnings of the Cold War was, what happened to Hitler's body? Is Hitler actually even dead? We didn't get that payoff with Hitler, and he obviously was like a far and away a much worse guy. And so it's like we get that with Mussolini, but I don't know, just some food for thought. So yeah, hope you guys liked it. Everything over at HTTHappen, of course.com, at HTTHappen for all the socials. Let's see, I'm not sure if there's anything else I want to say before we get out of here. I do appreciate you guys coming back week to week and press and play. Always, thank you. Give us 5 stars if you listen to this, wherever you're finding this. I will say I'm trying to get the outreach a little bit more. I'm trying to get that Spotify fix, guys. I don't know what it is. I see a lot of you guys over there listening to the episodes, which is great, but they're not the up-to-date ones. They're holding like 30 episodes that they haven't released, and I don't know why. But that's for me to worry about and for y'all to listen to when I get it done. Let's see. But yeah, so keep listening wherever you're listening. I'm trying to get it on as many platforms as possible, just to get more ears to this, so more people can help us find out how things happen. But yeah, 5 stars wherever you find this, 2 stars if you didn't love it. Tell us why you didn't love it, because constructive criticism is always welcome. Yeah, so that's it. I'll see you next week with the next How Did That Happen?